So I have a question. I like questions. Why do we study the Old Testament? It's the beginning. So while we're pondering that, I like audience involvement. I like the participation. That way, if somebody doesn't get it right, it's not only me. Somebody want to open up to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. There's a lot of reasons we look into the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the picture of every New Testament principle. And as we begin to study the Old Testament, the New Testament becomes clearer and clearer to us. And as we begin to understand what God thinks of holiness, what he thinks of purity, what he thinks of the land that he's sending his guys into, the children of Israel, we begin to understand a little bit of what we're supposed to be here. Anybody there? Anybody want to read a verse out of 1 Corinthians 10? A victim? Or do you want voluntold? Anybody? Michelle's got, okay, right back here. No, right here. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 6.
Now these things became our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted.
Paul writes that verse. These things should be an example to show us not to lust after evil things. You know the context of that? It's talking about the wilderness wanderings that the children of Israel have just left, and they're standing at the edge of the Jordan River ready to cross in. Paul says these things, what are these things? All these things going on in the Old Testament. The stuff we're about ready to read in Joshua, these are examples for us. So then the challenge becomes sometimes of finding the picture, finding the example that it's pointing to. Sometimes I read them and they're just a story. But other times it comes alive and I really see myself in it. That's the idea. It comes alive. So here's a little background. The Greek mind that wrote the New Testament, they see prophecy as proclamation, declaration, and fulfillment. So when most of us have that Greek mentality, not the Jewish rabbinical mind, we see prophecy as something was proclaimed, something was declared, and then we watch it unfold, right? But the Hebrew mind, which is the Old Testament mind that wrote the Bible, the mind of Christ, the rabbinical mind, the Jewish mind sees prophecy as pattern and fulfillment. Pattern and fulfillment. So when a rabbi reads the scriptures, they dig into it looking for patterns. What's this pattern? What's this pattern? What's this pattern? And sometimes I believe my mind, I'm looking for something to be proclaimed and then fulfilled, and then I'll check the box. They're looking for patterns subtly throughout it. And so as we look through Joshua 13 and 14, there's a couple things here that come to mind. And I'm going to read a little bit. I'm going to demonstrate my inability to pronounce transliterated Greek words, but it'll give us all something to chuckle about. We're going to pick it up in Joshua 13, and we're going to pick it up in verse 1. And don't worry, I'm not going to read all of it. I'm just going to read enough to make a fool of myself. Now Joshua was old and advanced in years, and the Lord said to him, "You are old and advanced in years." Do you like that the Lord is not very politically correct? Dude, you're old. The King James. Anybody have the King James? I love the King James, but do you know what it says here instead of advanced? It says you're stricken. You're stricken in years. That kind of conveys a little different picture, doesn't it? This says the same thing once you realize it. It means you're piled upon. I mean the years have let's say, they've been rough on you. You've had a rough go of it. At this point, several of the commentators that I read, and I don't know how they get their totality of their numbers, but several of the commentators that I've read said Joshua at his youngest, at this point here, at the fulfillment of the conquest of the land, but not quite delving the land out yet, he's at the youngest, 97 years old. He ain't no young, anybody 97, close to 90? Yeah. You feel it, don't you? He's pretty near twice my age. And the Lord states the obvious. Hey, Joshua, you're getting old. But here's what fascinates me. I've sat under some teaching and I've been to some studies, and I just want to bump this here because I don't want to leave this unsaid, that have made the statement, well, if you're old and you're feeble, if you're broken and you're sick, it's because your faith is weak. Have you guys heard that? And you know the verse they use? It's Deuteronomy 34, verse 6. It's where Moses, 34, verse 7, pardon me. It's Moses is on the top of Nebo looking into the promised land. And it says he was 120 years old, and the fire in his eyes and the strength of his muscles hadn't faded. Well, that was God's gift to Moses. Do you think Joshua's faith was weak? No. He just spent 7 years conquering these kingdoms. But he was beginning to show the age, the wear, the tear, the sword marks, the scars of the battle. First thing I notice here is God doesn't cover it up. And God doesn't condemn a man who's maybe showing the wear and tear of life a little worse than his predecessor was just 7 years earlier, and who was 20 plus years older than him. So just because we don't work as well as we used to, and I don't. You can ask anybody that knows me. I wander because if I stand still, pretty soon the back quits working. I don't know if any of you guys got it. It does not work. So I wiggle. So I look like I used to work with guys in addictions, and I'd go, hey, are you coming down off of something? Because you just won't stand still. Well, that's me now. I've got this tweak. I've got this wiggle going. Why? Life's been a little rough on my body parts, or maybe I have been. But it doesn't exclude me. And I love this. And it says, the next part of that verse, it says, and there remains yet very much land to possess. Joshua was 97. We're going to find out in a couple of chapters, he's going to go home to be with his father. He's going to pass away. A fancy way of saying they're going to bury him in a tomb at 110. Who do you think the land is to be conquered for? Joshua? No, he's about done, isn't he? God's telling Joshua, you're old. Life's been rough on you, but there's still a lot of work to do. And who's it for? It's the kids coming up. At this point, the oldest people other than Caleb, we're going to look into, other than Caleb, are almost 50 years younger than he is. Isn't that crazy? There was the dying off in the wilderness. Everybody from the age of 20 and up passed away in the 38 years of wandering. So now you've got this gap that the oldest ones are somewhere in their 50s, maybe 60 years old. That's a big gap. Joshua's got land to conquer for the kids. And God doesn't excuse him from the task just because life's been rough on him. God taps him on the shoulder and says, you've got lots to give. I love that. I love that. Someday they say a gray hair is a crown of glory, but no hair. Leviticus 13 says no hair is clean too. So I may not get it gray. I may not get the crown of wisdom, but I'm at least going to be clean. But there's still a purpose. There's still a use. Doesn't matter what your date of birth is. God's still got something for us. Now this is where it's going to get really fun, because I'm going to read some fun names here. Probably some good kids' names too. This is the land that remains. All the regions of the Philistines and those of the Geshurites, from Shihor west, which is east of Egypt, northward to the boundary of Ekron, it is counted as Canaanite. And there are 5 rulers of the Philistines, those of Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, Ekron, and those of Avim. In the south, all the land of the Canaanites, Amarah, that belongs to the Sidonians, to Aphek, to the boundary of the Amorites, and the land of the Gebalites, and all Lebanon toward the sunrise to Baal Gad, below Mount Hermon to Labo Hamath, all the inhabitants of the hill country from Lebanon to Misrephoth-Maim, even to the Sidonians. I myself will drive them out, before the people of Israel. Only allot the land to Israel for an inheritance, as I have commanded you. Verse 7. Now therefore divide this land for an inheritance to the 9 tribes and the half tribe of Manasseh. Finishing up in verse 8. With the other half of the tribe of Manasseh, the Reubenites and the Gadites received their inheritance, which Moses gave them beyond the Jordan, eastward, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had given them. So here's a list of names that I probably should have spared you guys reading it, but we just read it anyway. And I want you guys to be proud of me. I was high-tech this time. Michelle reached out, asked if I had a slide. I had a slide. So I actually have a picture right there. Can you guys see that? It's colored. I picked the brightest one I could find. I like color. So the red, the cities of the Philistines, the dark blue, it's kind of darker blue there. Both sides of the Jordan River, you really can't make out the Jordan River. That's the kingdom of Israel. So the territory that we're talking about here is everything from the Jordan River. It's the left half of the blue and all that red. The purple down in the bottom, I guess it's more like a pink, is the kingdom of Judah. Now, I picked the divided kingdom map because it was colored. The other one didn't have colors, and I love color. Do you guys notice on the left side down there where the map begins to kind of roll down, do you see a city down there that might look familiar, that you might have heard in the news? You guys see that? Yeah, you're in the same boat I am. It's right here. I'll give you a hint. It's in verse 3. It's Gaza. You ever heard that before? So Gaza, and it's fascinating, and I went onto the most biblically sound, doctrinally accurate website I could find, Wikipedia. Because look what they did. Look what they did to those cities of the Philistines. Do you know what those cities of the Philistines, you know what matches in today's map? The Gaza Strip. They colored it differently, which kind of interests me. They colored it differently than the kingdom of Judah, north and south. Israel and Judah, do you see that? You think they're making a statement there? Here's my observation. Verse 6, it says, the Lord speaking, I myself will drive them out from before the people of Israel. Only allot the land to Israel as an inheritance, as I have commanded you. So let me ask you this. What color should that be? It should be the same color as the rest of the kingdom of Israel. So this isn't political, but it could come across that way. There's no two-state solution. It's Israel. Who gave it to Israel? God. Whose inheritance is it? Israel's. But yet, here, and I love how biblically sound they are. They painted it red as the cities of the Philistines. Now, this is interesting to me. The harder we push to make a political solution to a biblical answer, the more we'll be broken. We're told in Genesis chapter 12, God speaking to Abraham before he promises the land in a covenant of the cutting of the offering, he tells Abraham, those who bless you I will bless, and those who curse you I will. And then he goes on in chapter 15 to cut covenant with him and tell him all of that land is for his descendants. So here's something that's interesting to me. God has given this as an inheritance to a group of people that he's chosen. He's chosen them. It's not ours to divide. And have you noticed how successful they have been at defending their land? More successful. I mean, you can't tell me that God isn't fighting for them. When they can hand out pagers and they take out leadership only. When they can find leadership people who want to do them harm and somehow they're miraculously you talk about the hand of God doing just what he says. I myself will drive them out. Do you know what our responsibility is for the nation of Israel? To pray for the peace of their capital. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. This right here this so brings us from a political answer to a biblical truth. And here, I wasn't going to do this. Somebody open up to Romans chapter 11. We're going to do another voluntold to read. Romans chapter 11. So there's a lot of folks that will say, and I've sat through the teachings, and I've read the articles and the commentaries by them that talk about, well, the church is replaced. The kingdom now is the church. It's not Israel. That was for back then, but they crucified Jesus. But here's the truth. Romans chapter 11. If you've got somebody that believes that, first thing I would do is I would have them sit down and read chapter 9, 10, and 11 of the book of Romans. Because it so goes against that. But this is the beautiful part. Chapter 11 of Romans, verse 29. Somebody have that one for me? I love involvement. This is good. You guys get to read. I get to watch. Go for it.
For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable.
Have you ever heard that? The gifts and the callings of God are irrevocable. Now go back and read the context. Do you know what the context is? The promise to the children of Israel. We have been grafted into the body because they've been given a partial hardening of the heart until the age of the Gentiles is full, complete. The context of Paul writing the deepest theological book in the New Testament, chapter 11, verse 29, is his promises and his callings are irrevocable. In what? To the children of Israel. This is cool. Do you know what is amazing? This map shows ancient Palestine, Israel. Joshua crossed the River Jordan in 1406 BC. 1,300 and what, 30 years ago? And God is still defending their land. Do you think our promises from Jesus, 3,000 years ago, are still good today? The same promise and the same ability he has to control a whole world risen against his chosen people. That same God is going to protect us. If he can protect a piece of dirt in the Middle East, can he protect all of us? That is what is so amazing to me. Guys, this is God saying, I'm going to fight for my kids. And oh, by the way, I'm grafting you into that family. So back to that types and pictures that the Hebrew mind. Do you know what Joshua would translate into in its Greek rendering? Jesus. Do you guys know a Jesus that conquered a kingdom in the Middle East on a cross? He conquered the kingdom of Satan. Joshua conquered a piece of soil. Jesus conquered hell itself and death. Isn't it cool, the type and the picture? We're reading about the conquest of a promised land, which is a picture, a type of our Savior conquering us as his promised people, conquering the sin and the death that would have owned us. This, to me, so proves the hand of God that 3,430 years after a promise was made, he's still able to keep it. That, to me, I can rest in what God says. The White House is in a good hands, or going to be, but I have no fear. My king sits on the throne of the universe. And whether you like Trump or not, and hey, I like the guy, I think. I don't know that he would ever have coffee with me, but whether he's sitting in the Oval Office at the Resolute desk or not, my God and my King can protect that little piece of dirt from all the world for 3,000 years and fulfill his promises to his people. I got nothing to worry about. I need to do for them and me the same thing. Pray for the peace of God to take my heart. So it excites me when I see pictures and types, when I understand God fulfilled his promise and he's not given up on him, he's not given up on me. So, one more quick observation. Down in verse 8, it's divided, this inheritance, and you can see, I don't know if you can make it out or not. There's the Dead Sea down there, the kingdom of Moab, the kingdom of Judah, and then there's the Jordan River kind of runs up to the Sea of Galilee in the north. The blue half that's off to that side, up next to the kingdom of Ammon in the yellow, this is the inheritance that Moses handed out to the Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. And I picked the brightest picture I could find. and listen to this. And it says, with the other half of the tribe of Manasseh, the Reubenites, the Gadites, received their inheritance, which Moses gave them beyond the Jordan eastward, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave them. There's a word repeated in there twice. Gave. Who did the giving? It says Moses. Do you know in the story in Deuteronomy chapter 3, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, they came forward and said, hey, we got lots of critters. We got lots of grazing animals. And this land looks really good. What if you just went in and we'll let you have that and we'll stay back over here because of our grazing? Remember the story? And here's the funny thing. We don't see a single incident where Moses brought it in prayer to the Lord. He didn't pray about it. Now, it does say God gave it to them as an inheritance. God pushed the kings out. But there's no evidence that Moses really gave them those tribes, the Lord, as an inheritance. It was to the kingdom of Israel, not the individual tribes. But they made a decision not to go into the promised land because it was better for their herds. There's another, and I'm going to read it for you. Matthew chapter 19. This is one of my favorite sections because when I do marriages, when I get to do premarital counseling and even some of the difficult postmarital stuff, this is the foundation to where we stand. But Jesus is approached by some Pharisees and they ask him, can we divorce our wives? Can we divorce our wives for any reason? And Jesus responds this way in verse 4 of Matthew 19. He answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Verse 6, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. Did he answer their question? Can we divorce? Yeah, he did. He says right here, he says, let no man separate. But typical as for me as a sinner, I asked him the question again, well, how close can I get and still be not sinning? So they said this again. But they said to him, why did then Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and send her away? And this is Jesus' response, and this breaks my heart. For me, because of your hardness of your heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. So there are times when the hardness of my heart puts God in a place where he has to allow what he doesn't want for me, where he doesn't want something in my life. But my heart is so hard, but he loves his son, me, so much that he allows me to get away with something that hurts me. I believe what we see back in the giving of the inheritance on the east side of the Jordan, I believe what we see there is one of those moments where God allowed Moses to make a concession to a group of people who said, no, God, I really don't want to go over there because I really like what I see here. There's another perfect example of this back in the book of Genesis. Abraham and Lot. You remember that story? Having too many herds, too many people, and he says, hey, what side do you want? We're getting in a bickering fight. So Abraham gave Lot the choice to choose. Lot picked the valley down by the Dead Sea, and Abraham took the hill country. And then we see how it worked out for Lot. A sad story. Here's what scares me and here's what concerns me for JP. There is no weapon formed against me. There's no army that's going to come against me. There's no force on this planet that will ever take the promises of God and the gifts of God. Save one. Me. God will say, I have so much for you, JP. I have so much for you to inherit, to live this promise of the promised land, the life filled with the Spirit. I have so much of this in store for you, but I'll let you not go in if you don't want to. And as we look, and if you guys have read the book of Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you begin to see this every time a nation attacks Israel from the north. They decimate those 2.5 eastern tribes. They get pummeled until finally they're taken out completely by the Assyrians, centuries before Judah goes down. Can I encourage you guys? Can I challenge you guys? God has an inheritance for us. Ephesians chapter 1. If you guys read the first chapter of Ephesians, in the first dozen verses, there's almost 13 promises. And then in verse 11, he says this, and we have an inheritance in him. They're all spiritual. We're not conquering Gershurites and Jebusites and Gibeonites. We're actually conquering darkness in our own heart. We're fighting against those things that would bring us disrest. We're fighting against those things that would cause us to be anxious and not peaceful. But we have a promise and an inheritance in Christ. So, can I challenge you as my brothers and sisters in the Lord? Let's don't settle for the east side of the Jordan River. Let's enter into where God calls us to in our relationships with each other, in our relationships in business, in how we view the world around us, how we love the neighbors on the other side of the fence. I want to challenge you, and maybe you can hold me accountable. I would like to look a little bit more like Jesus tomorrow than I woke up today. Romans 8:28 and 29. You guys read that, right? Remember that? Do you know that the difficulty we have is everything that happens, all things work together for the good to those who are called according to his purpose. All things work. All means all. But you know what verse 29 says? It says we're conformed to the image of Jesus. Do you know the hardships of battle that Joshua went through was probably the very thing he had to go through? So that in 97 years of age, he was still taking territory and holding a sword. That to me is so cool. But Moses didn't have to be wore out to enter into fellowship with God. Joshua had to. Isn't it fascinating? God knows what it's going to take to make me a good follower of him. So before we run completely out of time, I have one more chapter I'd love to read some out of. And got good news. I don't think there's many names in it. Really good news. Chapter 14, if you guys will just flip over one chapter, I'm going to read a handful of verses here real quick. Chapter 14 of Joshua, starting in verse 6. Then the people of Judah came to Joshua at Gilgal. Oh, there's a name. Is it there? There it is. Okay. I won't hit it again, I promise. No more violence. At Gilgal, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, you know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, in Kadesh Barnea, concerning you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought him word again as it was in my heart. But my brothers who went with me made the heart of the people melt. Yet I wholly followed the Lord, my God. And Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be an inheritance for you and your children forever, because you have wholly followed me, followed the Lord, my God. And now behold, the Lord has kept me alive, just as he said, these 45 years, since the time the that the Lord spoke his words to Moses while Israel walked in the wilderness. And now, behold, I am this day 85 years old. What an 85-year-old's birthday. I am still strong as I was in the day that Moses sent me. My strength now is the strength was then for war, for going out, and for coming in. So give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on the day. For you heard on that day how the Anakim were there with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out, just as the Lord said. Really quick background. Anakim. So Anakim means sons of Anak. Back in Deuteronomy, in the conquest of the eastern tribe, we find out that the bed of Anak, the king Og, one of the descendants, of Anak, was 13 feet long. Don't know if you guys sleep on a California king. Put two of them together, and you got Anak's descendants' bed size. These are big guys. Now get this. The sons of Anak, the giants, the descendants of Anak, we can't go into this. There's not enough time, but if you guys really want to dig into it, Genesis chapter 6, begin to look into what the Nephilim were, what the B'nai Elohim were when they come into the men, the sons of God that came down into the women of men, and the darkness and the deception that Satan was doing to pervert the line of humanity. But here we just know this. These were not only big people, but these were evil. But here's something else. They live on the hills in these fortified cities. Do you see what 85-year-old Caleb said? Hey, Josh, I want the big hill with the big giants and the big cities. Do you think at 85 years of age, he might be just a little bit more like, hey, give me the meadows. Is there some fishing holes down there or something? Is there some place where I can toss a hook in the river and I don't? He says, no, give me what? The hill country. But you know what fascinates me even more than his drive? Go back over and look with me at verse 8. It says this, but my brothers who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt, yet I wholly followed the Lord. What happened when the people's hearts melted? Do you remember that? They were at the promised land. They're at Kadesh Barnea, which is in the southern end, down there in the kingdom of Moab. They're coming up. So they didn't come from the south up this time. They came across from Jericho. And they're down there in the bottom, and they're getting ready to come up through the south. And they sent in 12 spies. You remember that? 10 of them came back and said what? Big people, we're little in our own sight. We're going to get our rears kicked. Let's go back someplace else and die. And Joshua and Caleb said, what? No. These guys are bred for us. These guys are ours. Let's take this land. But it says here, the bad counsel from the 10 spies did what? It melted the heart of the people. Let me ask you this. Have you guys ever been in a deal? Have you ever been in a situation where it was equal share and share alike? And because of somebody's foolishness, somebody's cowardice, somebody's backstabbing, you lost it all. You lost your share, your portion. I've been in a few situations. I know a friend, a brother in Christ who had a partnership, and he lost millions to a guy that he trusted completely. And to hear him talk about it, it touches my heart, because he actually prays for the guy's salvation more than the money. I'll get money back. I'm not worried about that. I was hurt by a friend, but I want that friend to know Jesus. This guy, Caleb, does something else. Do you know how long this deal affected Caleb? 38 years. He got run over by 10 cowardly counselors. And for 38 years, he wandered around in the wilderness knowing that he'd wholeheartedly followed the Lord. Do you know what our culture tries to convince us? We're victims. You ever heard that? Oh, I'm a victim of, I can't. I'm a victim of, I can't. Do you think Caleb has maybe a little bit of call to be a victim. Those idiots, those guys gave bad counsel, and for 38 years I wandered around the wilderness with those dirt heads, with those jerks. No, do you know what he calls them? What do you call them right there? My brothers. Do you know, this is what makes Caleb conquest of the high places, the giants, touch me even more. He's not a victim. He's not a victim. He refuses to take the victim card and play it and say, I was dealt a bad deck. He refuses to take victim status. He actually says, the Lord kept him alive for these 38 years. If I can leave you guys with one challenge, on top of the other ones we've already dealt with. The world wants to tell us we're a victim. It wants to tell you, well, you can't help yourself because this happened to you. You can't fix it because that guy has to do it. You can't do this because somebody over there did something really bad. And I'm not saying that those things aren't wrong. But Caleb right here is a perfect example. Hey, those are my brothers. They melted the heart of the people, and I wandered for 38 years. But I'm not a victim. You know what? He says, it may be, but if the Lord be with me, I will take those hills. He says it at the end of verse 12. I'm going to take him if the Lord is with me. He doesn't play the victim card. Yes, bad things can happen. Yes, they have. But here's what I know. If all things work together for the good of who? Me? I'm called. You're called. God can make that wound the strongest thing in your life if you give it to him. God can absolutely take what the enemy meant for evil. Genesis chapter 50. Remember that? Joseph tossed into prison, sold as a slave. His brothers come up to him and they're pleading for mercy because when dad dies, they think Joseph's going to cut him off. And Joseph said, no, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. I saved all of you because you sent me here. No, it's not pleasant. No, it's not easy. But let me challenge you this as we're closing up, as the worship team's making their way up. We're not victims. We are victors. Your testimony will become the victory song. It will become the anthem of those who follow you. You will share your story of conquest over what the enemy tried to do. And you will share that conquest, and it will build in the generations that follow you a hope in Christ and an understanding that the promises of God are kept by the hand of God. And so we skipped over like 97.5% of those 2 chapters. But if I can leave you with this, no retirement in the kingdom, like America calls it, and don't be a victim.